what Cyril was saying, so we can accept Leo's tome. Now notice there, they didn't just accept the tome because it was the Pope's. They didn't say, well, the Pope has spoken, the matter is closed, but they accepted Leo's tome because it agreed with their own great authority, St. Cyril. So they didn't just accept it because it was the Pope's word, but on other grounds. That just shows you the complexity there. However, Leo passed over that. They'd accepted his tome, so that was good enough for him. What was much more difficult was the confrontation in the 9th century between the then Pope Nicholas and the Patriarch of Constantinople, St. Photius. And Nicholas quite clearly said the Pope has authority over the whole earth, that is to say, over every church. Supra totam terram, id est supra omnem ecclesiam. Those were his words. But it was quite clear that people like Photius did not agree with that. And there was a breach of communion for a time, but then, after the death of Nicholas, when Photius became patriarch a second time, communion was maintained between Rome and Constantinople. So the issue was brought into the open, the Pope's claim to universal authority, but it wasn't really solved. So this makes it the appeal to the historical evidence not altogether easy. In the discussions, I myself have continually said to the Roman Catholics, and they must be getting a bit bored by this, produce evidence of the Pope exercising direct power of jurisdiction in the Christian East. Show me the facts, and show me that the Eastern bishops accepted this. And I don't get a straight answer, so I shall go on saying this. Metropolitan John Zizioulas, the chairman, does not press the issue in the way that I would wish him to do, but he doesn't shut me up so far. So
better keep his peace.
When we meet again, which has not yet been decided, I shall go on with the same point. Actually, someone who isn't at all pleased with this document that we're working on is from the Russian church, Metropolitan Hilarion of Volokolamsk.
Yes.
And he said this document is unsatisfactory, it should not be considered an agreed statement by the dialogue, it should be merely considered as a study document. And he has said to the press that the Orthodox agreed on this point. Well, they didn't actually. We weren't asked whether we agreed or not. You cannot assume because somebody says something in a conference that everybody else agrees with it. I think that the document is important and we should go on working on it, but we should focus on the real issue, which is the universal jurisdiction of the Pope. Because if the Roman Catholics will concede that he didn't have such jurisdiction in the first millennium, that is a very major concession on their part. And if we Orthodox can persuade them to say this, that would be a good thing. So, that's something on the Catholic Orthodox dialogue. I might say we're quite a large group there. Each Orthodox church sends 2 delegates, so there are 28 Orthodox delegates from the 14 Orthodox churches, and therefore 28 Roman Catholic delegates, but they are selected centrally, I suppose, by the Council for Christian Unity and the Pope. Now a few words on the Anglican Orthodox dialogue. This is not such a grand group. The Orthodox only have one delegate from each church, and therefore there are only 14 delegates from the Anglican Communion, and the 14 Anglican delegates are all selected centrally by, I don't quite know which body, but in the Orthodox case, of course, each Orthodox church makes its own choice of a delegate. So we are only a group of about 28 as opposed to approaching 60 in the Roman Catholic dialogue. Now, the Anglican Orthodox dialogue has distant origins, going back much earlier than the Roman Catholic Orthodox dialogue. It's worth remembering that in the early 17th century there were quite friendly relations between the Orthodox and the Anglicans. Mitrophanes Christopoulos, a future patriarch of Alexandria, studied at Balliol College here in Oxford for 5 years, from 1617 to 1622. Balliol College has broad interests. I can remember in Jerusalem, when I was a research student there in the early 1960s, there was an elderly Ethiopian monk sitting outside the Holy Sepulchre every day in rags with a begging bowl beside him, praying. And I made friends with an Ethiopian deacon who was studying in Jerusalem, and he said, let's come and talk to this monk. He's a very interesting person. And so he brought me up to the monk, and he said to the monk in English, here's Timothy, he's at Oxford. And then this aged figure in rags said in very cultivated tones, how's Balliol these days? It was the last thing I had expected. And he clearly had been a student at Balliol in his younger days, and he spoke beautiful English. And afterwards I said to my Ethiopian friend, but who is he? Oh, he said he used to be our foreign minister. And I felt back in the Middle Ages that he decided, having laid down office, to go and pray in Jerusalem and hope to die there, but he'd given up everything and lived in total poverty. I was very impressed by that. So good for Balliol. Another person who was at Balliol in the 1630s and 40s was a certain Nathaniel Cornopius, and he is reputed to be the first person to introduce coffee drinking into Britain. So never before and never since has the Orthodox Church had such a direct effect on the daily life of people. At the end of the 17th century, there was even a plan to found a Greek college in Oxford, where Worcester now stands. John Wesley, when he found that none of the bishops of the Church of England would ordain his preachers, in 1763 invited a Greek bishop to come over from Amsterdam, a certain Erasmus or Gerasimus, who ordained priests for Wesley's movement. Wesley would have been quite happy about this because he was a high churchman and would respect the Orthodox as a church possessing the true apostolic succession. But what the Greek bishop thought he was doing, history does not relate. More recently, there have been a whole series of contacts between the Church of England and the Orthodox. at London, 1930 and 31, at Bucharest in 1935. That was probably the high point in Anglican Orthodox relations. And then more recently at Moscow in 1956. I remember hearing from the Anglican theologian Dr. Eric Maskell, who was at the Bucharest conference in 1935, a pleasing story. At one point, the Anglicans asked the Orthodox for a statement of Orthodox teaching on a particular matter. And one of the Orthodox began expressing the Orthodox view, whereupon all the other Orthodox attacked him and disagreed with him. And an Orthodox argument went on for some time, and then one of the Anglicans ventured to say, perhaps on this point there is no agreed Orthodox view. Whereupon all the Orthodox turned on him and said, not at all. We are all quite sure that we agree, only we're not quite sure what we agree about. Which is actually more serious than it might sound, that we Orthodox have a deep feeling of unity, but sometimes we're not quite sure how that's to be expressed. Anyway, a pan-Orthodox and pan-Anglican dialogue was started eventually in 1973 here in this city of Oxford. And it was during the course of that dialogue that our church was consecrated, and there you see the Orthodox delegates and others who were present at that conference. The consecration service took up about 4 to 5 hours in the morning, thus limiting our discussions. Some of the Anglicans were a little restless about this. Never mind. And then we had further meetings, and we produced 2 reports at Moscow in 1976 and Dublin in 1984. I was a member of the dialogue at that point, and indeed for some time the theological secretary. One of my happy memories is when we were meeting in Ireland in 1984, not actually in Dublin, but in a rural conference centre run by nuns. And I came down on the first day for breakfast to find Metropolitan Basil of Caesarea at the coin telephone box, looking rather flustered. And I said, "Can I help?" "Yes," he said, "I'm trying to ring up Jerusalem." Well, to ring up Jerusalem from a coin box in rural Ireland in those days was a little optimistic. And in those days, it used to exist in Britain too, so some of you I'm sure remember this. The system was you put your money in the box before you dialed, then when you got through, if you got through, you pressed button A, and the machine swallowed up your money, but you could talk to the person the other end. If you couldn't get through to the person the other end, you had to press button B, and you got your money back. Well, Metropolitan Basil said, "I can't get through, and I've pressed button B, but it hasn't given my money back." So I said, "Perhaps you didn't press button B hard enough." Whereupon he gave button B a mighty blow, and this evidently dislodged something in the interior of this box, and money began to pour out. Coins came out, and they filled up the little place where the coins had to go, and then they continued to pour out and shoot across the floor. And this went on for about 3 minutes. Evidently, many other people had put their money in, pressed button B, and not got it out. It required a firm Orthodox hand to settle this matter.